who in the space of 5 years has transformed the landscape of the university and re-engineered the narrative of the institution, both locally and internationally. To this, I say thank you, sir. Permit me also to introduce to you members of the university management. The Deputy Vice Chancellor Academics, Professor Wahab Elias, the Deputy Vice Chancellor Administration, Professor Yedamola Oke, the University Registrar and Secretary to Council, Mr. Mohamed Olayinka Amuni.
I suspect there is a technical issue from the other end. You can unmute yourself, madam, if you're back. Please unmute yourself.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't know I was muted. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. I said, I also recognize the acting provost, LASU, Professor Adewuya Abiodun, all professors here present, deans, directors, and the entire university community here present. You are all duly recognized. I also want to specifically acknowledge the invaluable assistance of the Director, Research and Innovation, Professor Olumuyiwa Odusoya, in making this 16th virtual lecture a reality. Not left out is my immediate constituency. That is the Committee of Heads of Internal Audit in Nigerian universities, Chiadinu, and all the members of their staff that is joining us today. Friends, family members, ladies and gentlemen, you are all recognized. To do justice to the theme of this 16th virtual lecture are 3 great personalities. The first speaker is Dr. Andres G. Kotupis. He is an associate professor and chairman, KNR Governance, Risks, Compliance, and Internal Audit Service in Mediterranean Destiny Limited, Greece. He will be the team leader, the team speaker. He will be speaking on the bridging the expectation gap, the internal audit and the university community. We have the second speaker, Dr. Sharafa Olariwaju, who is already with us now, a principal lecturer, Towa College, London. He will be speaking on the subtopic, governance, risks, and compliance, a collective responsibility. The last speaker, but not the least, is our own Mr. Temitope Olatunde Lawal, a chief internal auditor in the Directorate of Internal Audit, LASU. And he will be speaking on the subtopic, Audit Query, a correctional tool to ensure compliance with internal control. I strongly believe that at the end of this public lecture, the entire university community and everyone joining us today will be well informed regarding the role and responsibility of internal auditors, so that we will not expect more than what the auditor should offer. On the issue of governance, risks, and compliance, I would say it is not for the auditor alone. By the time Dr. Sharafa Olariwaju is through with his presentation, you will all agree with me that it is a collective responsibility. The last issue to be addressed is an interesting and controversial one. And I know it will be of utmost interest to every participant here this afternoon. It is the issue of audit query as a correctional tool to ensure compliance with internal control. No one or staff desires to be queried, but the auditor is sometimes left with no other option than to apply it as a tool to ensure compliance with rules and regulation. The speaker, Mr. Lawal, is the head of prepayment audit unit of the directorate in this university. And this is the unit that issues most queries. So he's eminently qualified to provide the necessary insight into the issue. So how do we go about this lecture, this 16th public lecture? Each speaker we have 15 minutes to speak and 2 minutes to answer questions thereafter. Participants are enjoined to drop their questions in the chat box. At the end of the lecture, the questions will be directed to the relevant speakers for response. I therefore implore you to kindly sit back and listen attentively to the 16th virtual public lecture of the Lagos State University. We are LASU, we are proud. I am your moderator for today, Mrs. Margaret Ogunkoya, the Acting Director of Internal Audit. Thank you very much.
The first speaker.
For now, we are still awaiting Dr. Kotopis. So we will ask Dr. Sharafa Olanrewaju, who is going to take us on governance, risks, and compliance, GRC, to start his lectures while we are waiting for Dr. Kotopis from Greece.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Sharafa, over to you. You have 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much. The moderator, Mrs. Margaret Ogunkoya. Thank you so much for that brief introduction and background of the university. But I'd like to start today's talk by first acknowledging and paying a huge tribute to the Vice Chancellor of the university, Professor Olanrewaju Fagbo, for allowing your directorate to hold such an important virtual conference, perhaps the 16th virtual conference, which captures such an important theme under his leadership. Having paid a huge tribute to the Vice Chancellor, I also want to recognize eminent academians and professors who are here to listen to what I've got to say around the theme governance, risk, and compliance, a collective responsibility. To be invited to speak, or for one to be asked to speak to academians, professors, and renowned scholars of universities like the Lagos State University, for examples, is not that very easy, because one is faced with a challenge of what is it that you want to say, or what is it that you want to, share that will perhaps sit close to the heart of eminent scholars. But because as a public speaker and a researcher, we do not, give up. We continue to do all that we can to ensure we are able to satisfy or meet the needs of our audience. I was able to put together some thinking around the team governance or the sub-team governance, risk and compliance, a collective responsibility. Hence, what I'm going to be doing today is to share my thoughts with you, in which case is in no way near an empirical contribution or an empirical lecture, but rather coming here to share my thought. Would you then permit me to share my slide, if possible?
You can share your screen. You can.
Thank you so much. So, I will be speaking on this topic, governance, risk, and compliance. And by virtue of my background, I suppose I have some competencies to do so as a chartered governance professional. And to do justice to today's topic, I will share my thoughts around the introductory comment, what governance is and what governance is all about, what governance is not. I'll speak a little bit about governance and IT governance. I will talk about the link between strategies and GRC. I will look at where institutions seek a better approach, or why institutions seek a better approach to governance. And then I will look at briefly the GRC and the university community. I'll touch a little bit on how governance, risk, and compliance is a collective responsibility. Then I will draw conclusion. To start with, the acronym GRC means governance, risk, and compliance. I've defined the term governance as a system by which an entity established to create value is directed and controlled, paying due regards to factors such as environmental, social, and compliance. That is, it is so difficult to talk about corporate governance or governance, as you may wish to refer to it, without paying regards to environmental issues, social issues, and compliance issues or governance issues. Now, when we speak about governance, we sort of look at those guys who direct the affairs of an entity. In which case, in the university case, for instance, we're talking about the Senate. So these are the guys that manages or direct the affairs of the university. And the custodian of governance in such institution will probably be the secretary to the Senate. So when we speak about governance, we speak about the entire system or the entire management of an entity. And today, the word GRC is gaining more traction, perhaps because you cannot govern without paying attention to risk that an organization is exposed to. I used to argue that when you put in a great strategy, one risk can collapse the entity and the strategy will become irrelevant or will become useless. So it is important that while putting together governance arrangements or while ensuring good governance, there's particular attention is paid to risk, or one is paying huge attention to the risk the entity is exposed to. Otherwise, the occurrence of one risk can sort of erode the efforts one has put in place as far as governance is concerned. Non-compliance is risky on its own. Non-compliance is risky. For example, non-compliance to law, non-compliance to environmental regulations, non-compliance to the National University Commission rules and guidelines on its own is risky. You and I will agree with me, a reputational damage that is almost about to happen to a university, popular university in our country, as a result of regulatory issues that is happening around its governance arrangement. That on its own almost brings down the reputation of the university. if not for the intervention of a visiting presidential arrangement that sort of put that to rest. And that's one of the reasons why I started my opening remark by paying huge tribute to your Vice Chancellor, Professor Fagbo, for doing all that he could have done to maintain the reputation of this university. I think that is a huge, huge contribution on his part as a Vice Chancellor of the university, not only keeping the custody of governance of the university, but also keeping the university away from likely reputational damage or any risk that could erode its long-term existence. So we said there's interrelationship between governance, risk, and compliance. And the interrelationship is that governance is king. The king must pay attention to risk in a compliance context. Otherwise, there will be problem. Okay. So what is GRC? What therefore, or what then is GRC? We said governance, risk, and compliance refers to strategy for managing an organization overall governance, enterprise risk management, and compliance with regulation. It's just an attempt to weave the three together and perhaps to bring them together to let us know that it is an interrelated arrangement. And some people have argued that the risk we're talking about here is not just an ordinary risk, but we're talking about an enterprise risk. We sort of looked at the risk from a more comprehensive perspective. A well-planned governance risk and compliance strategy comes with lots of benefits: improved decision, more optimal IT investment, elimination of silos, and reduced fragmentation among division and department, to name a few. And it is important, before I go further, that I should sort of touch base on the internal audit department, what role they play as far as governance is concerned. The internal audit department tend to look at their role from accounting standard point of view, or from the international auditing standard point of view, or perhaps from organization policies and the roles the internal audit is expected to play. But trust me, these days, internal auditing are now playing roles wider than just auditing of accounting related issues or internal control issues, but also to check whether there are compliance to policies. Internal auditors also plays roles to check whether there are compliance to policies, whether there are compliance to risk management frameworks that has been developed by an organization. Internal auditor also play some roles as far as governance is concerned, which includes strengthening the governance arrangement of an institution. So one could sort of argue that an internal audit function is a mechanism that may strengthen governance arrangement of an institution. So it is important to begin to appreciate the role of an internal auditor as far as governance, risk, and compliance is concerned. So don't forget what I said, that governance is king. The king must pay attention to risk in a compliance context. So again, we said that what are we talking about when we speak about governance? When we speak governance, we speak strategy. And that's why I liken governance within your institution to the role the Senate plays. The Senate of the university is sort of the engine room for the university strategy. It sort of determines the long-term existence, or it sort of put together a strategic document that drives the future of the university. When we talk about governance, we talk about goals and objectives. We talk about policies and procedures. We talk about structures and process. So all of these are matters that concern the governance of an institution, and the governance arrangement ensure that risk that the university is exposed to, or that an entity is exposed to, is managed, and of course that risk are carefully chosen in such a way that it enables university to attract more opportunities and to minimize reputational damage. But when we talk about risk management, we talk about factors or issues such as risk identification, risk analysis, risk profile, risk monitoring, and of course, active objectives in which we use or intend to manage this risk. And one of where the internal audit is relevant is to continue to monitor the risk, to audit the risk profile, carry out an audit on the risk profile of the entity. The internal auditor is, or the internal audit department is relevant as far as this is concerned. And when we talk about compliance, we talk about compliance with policies and procedures. A lot of people, a lot of organizations have policies, but the question is, are we complying with these policies? There are laws and regulation control and activities. And then we need to check compliance to all of this. So it's tactical action to mitigating risk. And I love that, because one thing we should always do is to always connect these three themes together. That governance arrangement has to be strong, risk has to be identified and mitigated or mitigate, and then unless you demonstrate compliance to laws, regulations, and policies, you'll be exposing the entity to risk, in which case governance will then become, irrelevant. So to put things into context, GRC is about ensuring that integration of strategies and risk, I've said that a lot, eliminating silos through integration of people, process, and system. So what that means is that we're not abandoning people, we're not abandoning systems, we're not reinventing systems. But what we are doing is that we're integrating this system, we're making them more robust, we're making them more collaborative, and we are encouraging communication among people, process, and system to ensure compliance with driving the business forward. You see that? So when we speak about compliance, we speak about the long term, or we speak about continuity of the business. A business that does not comply is a business that is ready to collapse. A business that does not comply with the rules and regulations, with the laws, is a business that is likely to collapse. A university that is not compliant to its own policy, it's a university that is ready to lose its reputation to the general public. A university that is not compliant with NUC regulation, it's a university that's likely to lose its what? Accreditation and the right to award degree. A university that is not complying with its own self-rule, i.e. the Senate standing orders, is a university that is likely to lose its reputation in the public. And when you lose your reputation, it cuts short your continuing existence in business. It cuts short your continued contribution to research, education, and what? Producing world-class individuals to work in the labor force. So we said GRC is ensuring a timing and complete flow of good quality information among those responsible for governing an enterprise. It's an interrelationship between the internal audit, between the account, between the legal department, between the governance department, between the academia and non-academia. So the interrelationship of this, timely interrelationship, and when we talk about IT, we speak about IT, how IT helps in timely interrelationship of this. Again, it is ultimately, it is about running an organization better. So when we say it's about running an organization better, what are we talking about? Better here is about value creation. When you create value, we're talking about creating value to stakeholders, not creating value to shareholders. In the context of the university, I'm going to touch more. When I speak about GRC within the university environment, I'll speak about how do we make the university better using the GRC as a tool. What it is not about, we often confuse the word GRC, and that's why I love to place a caveat here. GRC is not a technology. It is not a technology. Some people assume that when we talk about governance, risk, and compliance, then we need to get to China to talk about building technology. We need to be thinking about sophisticated technology. It is not an extra layer for what? for bureaucracy or a bureaucracy or extra bureaucracy layer in an organization. It is not about eliminating process and technology to start all over again. No, we don't need to start all over again. It's not about creating competition among departments and withdrawing or redrawing the political power line within the organization. No, it is not about it's about goal congress and not about sub-optimization. Okay, it is not about a catchy phrase for software vendor and professional services provider to generate revenue. So when we talk about GRC, we're not talking about looking for a vendor, someone who could supply us IT or resources, or someone who could just put some funds together or put proposal together and take money. No, but IT has a role to play. And the reason why IT has a role to play is that we want to be timely. We want to ensure that GRC is integrated. We want to ensure that GRC enhance or the implementation of governance, risk, and compliance within our establishment or institution is collaborative. We want to ensure that communication flow is easier. We don't want software everywhere. We don't want process everywhere. We don't want people everywhere. We want people to work collaboratively. We want compliance to link with risk. We want risk to link with governance. We want governance to be able to identify the risk the entity is exposed to. We want to be able to identify what risk are we exposed to.
Dr. Sharafa.
Yes, please.
Dr. Sharafa, you have 2 minutes, please.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you so much. So, So we said that governance is, IT has a role to play with the linking of governance, risk, and compliance. Well, when we talk about a strategic link, strategy, don't forget I said it's about governance. It sits on governance. When we have a strategy, we plan the process, we'll be there to drive it. And that's where GRC will come in. The governance, risk, and compliance will then play a key role there. Now, why institution needs to pay attention to GRC, I will just summarize this slide into the reason why we should pay attention will be ESG, which is economic reason, environmental reason, and social reason. And if you don't pay attention to ESG, you lose reputation, and therefore stakeholder will put you on rest. Then what is it that we're talking about? GRC and the university community. GRC and university community, the governance of the university is the Senate, who must ensure that the reputation of the university is held intact. And that's why I want to continue to appreciate your Vice Chancellor for continuing to keep the reputation of the university at the highest level. The compliance level is high, and that's why your reputation remains intact. And therefore, collectively, we have roles to play. Everybody plays role: management, internal audit, regulation, system, department, legal, finance, board. We all have a role to play in internal audit. To conclude, GRC is a journey and not a destination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharafa Olarewaju, for this great presentation. I said it earlier that at the end of your presentation, everyone here will agree with me that GRC, that is governance, risks, and compliance, is a collective responsibility. You have made us to understand that it's a collective responsibility from the top to the lowest cadre of the university. We must comply with rules and regulation, and the internal audit also must ensure compliance. The governance, you said it that you cannot govern without paying attention to risks, which an organization is exposed to. In a time like this, organizations are exposed to different types of risks. We have the cybersecurity and other types of risks that organizations are exposed to. So the internal auditor, especially my colleagues that are joining us today, should ensure compliance in order to reduce the risks that the organization or the university is exposed to. Thank you very much once again for this great presentation. The next presenter now, the next speaker, I will call on Mr. Olatunde Lawal Temitope, because we are still awaiting Dr. Kotupis to join us. So Mr. Temitope Olatunde Lawal, Chief Internal Auditor in the Directorate of Internal Audit, we will be presenting a subtopic to us on, he will be presenting a subtopic to us on audit query, a correctional tool to ensure compliance with internal control. I know this is a controversial one and an interesting one that everyone will be interested to listen to. So over to you, Mr. Lawal.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I also want to welcome the Vice Chancellor, Professor Olariwaju Adigun. I want to acknowledge the presence of other principal officers as well. And I want to appreciate the initiative by the Acting Director of Internal Audit, Mrs. Okunkoya, for bringing about this. I believe it will go a long way in bridging the gap between the internal audit and the university community. The topic for discussion that I have been given is audit query, a correctional tool to ensure compliance with internal control. Audit query, a correctional tool to ensure compliance with internal control. One of the major areas of frictions between the internal audit and members of staff and other stakeholders of any organization is the issue of audit query. And the Lagos State University is not an exception. As we all know, no one wants to be queried. However, if the goals and objectives of an organization is to be achieved, someone somewhere must be on guard to ensure that the internal control measures put in place by management are enforced. So this discussion is an attempt to sensitize members of the community to bridge the gap and thereby reduce the incidence of audit query. But before I go into what causes audit query and how to curb them, I quickly want to speak on the purpose of internal audit. The world over, the internal audit is designed to add value, to improve operations, and also to help organizations achieve their goals and objectives. This is done by bringing a systematic and disciplined approach in improving effectiveness of risk management, control, and the governance process. The internal audit is also expected to provide management with insights, with information, with appraisals, counsels, and recommendations regarding the activities they have audited and other matters that are material. And you may want to ask, internal audit of LASU, what do they do? Number one, we identify operational risk, financial risk, and other risk that the university could be exposed to. And we don't stop at that. We recommend measures to mitigate the effect of such risk. We verify the existence of assets and recommend proper safeguards for their protection. We evaluate the adequacy or otherwise of system of internal controls and recommend improvements where necessary. We also assess compliance with policies and procedures as contained in university financial regulations and the university conditions of service, and other sound business practices which may be codified or not. We assess compliance with federal and state laws, federal laws on taxation, payee tax, value-added tax, withholding tax, and the likes. We also assess compliance with pension laws as applicable and other taxes as applicable to the university. We investigate reported occurrences of fraud, embezzlement, theft, waste that occurs within the system. We review operations within the university programs, and ascertain whether results are consistent with established objectives and whether the operations and programs of the university are being carried out as planned. And you may want to ask, why query? When we query, there are two issues. Is either to seek clarification or to ensure compliance. However, in the course of discharging our duties, the internal audit may request additional evidence or seek answer to certain gray areas that is not so clear to us. This is done to validate the accuracy of the request or process or transactions. And in doing this, it may necessitate an audit query. I want us to know this, please. An audit query is neither a witch hunt nor a death sentence. Rather, I want us to see it as a tool employed by the internal auditor to ensure compliance with internal control system, which has already been put in place by the management. For the purpose of emphasis, I want to tell us that an audit query, to disabuse the minds of members of the university community, as well as to sensitize us in an attempt to close the gap on this kind of issues. You want to agree with me that as professionals, our duty includes safeguarding the asset of the university. And in doing this, we assist the management in mitigating risk. So therefore, we can only process requests that are accompanied with sufficient evidences. And where we have slightest doubts about the request, we raise an audit query, like I earlier mentioned, to seek clarification or enforce compliance. So some reasons for audit query. There are dozens of reasons that could bring about an audit query. But because of the limited time we have, the limited time allotted for this discussion, I have just 15 minutes. I will not be able to mention everything, but I will talk about a few that comes to our table every day. Number one, where an officer of the university approves a request that is beyond his approval limit. We have seen officers of the university whose approval limit is just 100,000 naira, approving something like 200, 300,000. When we see this, we issue query. We have the financial regulations which states the approval limit of officers of the university. So, and because of our time, I'll not be able to mention them one after the other. Number two, where a request for procurement of item is not accompanied by at least 3 quotations, and this is in line with the Public Procurement Act. And we do this to ensure competitive pricing. Another instance, where the university is to provide mobilization fund for the execution of a project, and the request is not accompanied by performance bond from a reliable or reputable insurance company or background guarantee. When this is not attached, we issue audit query. And when we observe arithmetic inaccuracy in a request, perhaps you have listed your total for your request, say 2.4 million, and we conduct our arithmetic test, and it's showing 2,200,000. We issue an audit query. Another instance where you present an outrageous price or quantity for a job. For example, this laptop, the market value is 200,000 naira, and you are presenting your request and you have quoted 300,000 naira. Of course, what usually comes to our mind is that because of inflation, the prices must have gone up in the market. So we consult the procurement unit for the prevailing market price, or we speak directly to any of the vendors outside. So and when we see that the prices you are giving is on the high side, we issue query. Of course, we know that prices are not the same everywhere. If the price is quoted as a marginal difference, most times we allow it to go. But when the difference is much, we issue an audit query. Another instance where variation is observed in prices quoted, in prices, in specification and quality in relation to the sample. You have been given a cash advance to procure a particular item, a particular brand, and you are bringing another. The internal audit will not accept that. Or in the case of a supplier, there's something else on the LPO, and you are bringing another thing. It is the duty of the internal audit to enforce compliance. Another instance, where a request for a payment to a contractor for work done is not accompanied with any of the following: evidence that the contractor is a registered one, a duly endorsed LPO or letter of award, a GRN from the central source, delivery note, invoice, a coding certificate, that's in case of equipment, and authentication by the end user affirming that what is supplied is what they requested for. And in the case of a construction project, you have to attach the joint inspection reports. Another instance, where the applicable rates approved by the university management are not followed in calculating night allowance and mileage claims for staff. This has to do with staff that go for international and local conference or those unofficial trip on behalf of the university. Or where a cash advance is not supported with any of the following: a relevant and duly acknowledged performance invoice or quotation, and a duly completed and authorized cash advance commitment form. Another instance is the case of where a request for motor vehicle air conditioners and other repairable items do not have the input of the works and servicing unit. You know, internal audit and the bursary, we are not experts in motor vehicles and repairable items. So we rely on the expertise of people in the works department. Another instance, where a request for item that is of significant value is processed as cash advance rather than through LPO. We allow cash advance for items that are in tens of thousands. But when you want to procure items that is over 100,000, 200,000, we insist on going through the procurement for LPO or letter of award. Or where a request that should have been processed as cash advance is processed as a direct expenditure, the internal audit will ensure compliance. This is to ensure accountability. Another instance, where a cash advance request is processed in favor of a junior member of staff rather than a senior member of staff. where we see this, we issue query. Another instance, where a request does not have a specific approval from the relevant approving authority, the budget holder, the head of department, whether he has the authority to approve as much as that or not, must endorse every request from a particular department. So in conclusion, audit query should be seen as a tool employed by the internal audit to help staff members comply with management policies, especially when they are unaware of the implications of such infractions. Audit query also helps in ensuring quality service delivery. It also helps in conserving funds for the university. It ensures effectiveness, efficiency, and economy in transactions undertaken on behalf of the university. And finally, if we all align ourselves with these submissions of mine and understand the watchdog role of the internal audit, there will be less friction, the expectation gap will be further bridged, and our university will be better for it. Thank you.
Moderator, you can unmute yourself, please.
Hello,
Yes, we
are
can
you
hear you.
hearing me now, sir?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawal. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. I earlier said this, that he is the head of prepayment audit unit, the unit that issues most of the queries, and that he's eminently qualified to provide the necessary insights, which I believe that everyone here will agree with me that he has done justice to that paper. He has been able to let us know that audit query is a tool to ensure compliance, but not a witch hunting tool. It's a tool to help us ensure compliance with internal control put in place by management. And he has given us a lot of examples of where a situation where audit queries are issued. So with this, I believe that the expectation gap between the internal audit and the university community concerning query, issuance of query, will be breached with the explanation of Mr. Lawal Oti. Thank you very much. While we are still awaiting the lead speaker, Dr. Kotupis, but while we are waiting for him, I would like Dr. Sharafa Olarewaju to give us a little insight into bridging the gap between internal audit and the university community. Dr. Olarewaju, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I do not intend to present or the view of the lead paper presenter, but I want to start by first, adding my voice to the last speaker's voice about the role of internal auditor and how things get queried. And then you will agree with me that audit query is therefore a governance mechanism to enhance compliance to rules, regulations, the laws, and all of that. And putting things together, you will see that queries therefore strengthens the regulatory arrangement that is put together by the university and by the relevant stakeholders. But with respect to expectation gap in audit, there are two types of expectation gap that one could refer to. There is the performance gap, and there is the legal or the regulatory gap. So the performance gap speaks so much about what the auditor actually does and what is the expectation of the auditor, in which case Mr. Lawal has helped us touch base on that, i.e. the way the general public sees what we do or what the auditor does, and the expectation as to what they think the auditor should do. In terms of the professional gap, is about what does the auditing standard expect of an auditor, and what does the auditor actually do in reality, or the legal gap. But you would agree with me that there is so much literature around auditors' expectation, but in summary, we should see an auditor as a mechanism to strengthen governance, not necessarily to police, but of course to sort for clarification, to strengthen the compliance arrangement, to enhance compliance. Don't forget what I said, that if we disregard compliance, we are all putting ourselves to risk. When I mean putting ourselves to risk, it means we're putting our job to risk, because if we don't comply with rules and regulation, and the university lost or loses reputation, the multiplier effect of that is that the university will not be attractive to new enrollment. The public will not see the university as a serious place to send their children, and therefore our job will then become challenging. So that's why we must have serious regards and respect for compliance, because in doing so is to keep our institution in being, and guaranteeing the going concern of our institution. And when our institution's going concern is guaranteed, we then speak about sustainability, we speak about long term, we speak about economics, social, and governance arrangements are being intact. So to close my remark around expectation gap, I think Mr. Lawal has done very good justice to what the auditor actually does, what the internal auditor actually does, because I want us to keep the focus of this discussion to compliance and the role of internal auditor, rather than looking at it from the expectation gap from a broader perspective of what an external auditor does. So I think we should leave it as compliance and the role of internal auditor to enhance and strengthen the compliance, and that it is not necessarily to frustrate us, but it is rather to sort for clarity and to ensure that the university continues to be a reputable institution to attract the general public. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharafa Olanrewaju, for giving us this insight into the expectation gap between the internal audit and the university community. As you have earlier said, the expectation gap is divided into performance and regulatory gap. That is performance, that is what the auditor is supposed, what the outsiders, I mean the university community is expecting the auditor to do, and what the auditor believes he's supposed to do. And we have the statutory one, that is what the auditor is expected to do by law. Thank you very much for this. And we know that, and the internal audit is seen as a mechanism to strengthen governance.
Yes.
Yes. So when internal audit is strengthened, governance is also strengthened.
Yes.
Thank you for this. And Mr. Lawal, I will still call you to also give us just 2 minutes talk on the expectation gap. Since we are the lead speaker on the expectation gap, you have said it all. This is what, even if he's here, this is what he will say. The expectation gap between the university community and the internal audit. I want you to speak further. 2 minutes, please, on this. Mr. Lawa, you have the floor.
All right. On the expectation gap.
Sorry, before you continue, while we are listening to Mr. Lawa, if you have any question, please send it to the chat box so that the speakers will answer you. Thank you. Mr. Lawa, you can continue.
Okay. On the expectation gap, a lot of people, they have this idea that the internal audit and auditor generally, their job is to detect fraud, to detect fraud generally. But that is not really our job. Our job is to ensure that the internal control measure put in place by management is enforced. But however, in the course of discharging our duty, if we discover cases of fraud, it is expected of us to report on this. A lot of people, when we go out to work, they see that our internal audit is thinking that we are thieves, we have done something wrong. It is not really so. Of course, after carrying out our assignment, most of the things we discover as a result of error, oversight, and the internal audit being the last wall of defense in enforcing internal controls. It is our duty to correct. So when we correct, we expect you to see us that we are just being a guard, the police of the university. We are not there to wish hunt you or to tag you inappropriately. So the expectation, the university expects us to do a particular thing. And we know what we are supposed to do. And in discharging this, we require cooperation from every member of the university community. And if we all do this, it will go a long way in bringing synergy to how we do things. Thank you.
Thank you very much for adding this voice to what Dr. Olanrewaju Sharafa has presented. Now, we employ every one of us. You don't want to ask questions from auditors. We are waiting for your questions. We are waiting for your questions on GRC, that is Governance, Risks and Compliance. Do you have any question on that? We are waiting for your questions on Audit Query, because we have a lot of questions on Audit Query daily on our table. Please throw it out today. Let people learn from you. Send in your questions. The speakers are here to answer you. We need questions. We know that internal auditors are not friends with people around. I don't know. Maybe that is why you are not asking questions. We need your question. We want to clarify issue with you now. Please send in your questions. And then while we are awaiting the questions, do you, Dr. Sharafa, do you have any closing remark for the university community and the participants in general? on GRC or expectation gap? Dr. Olarewaju Sharafa. Please unmute yourself. Dr. Olarewaju.
Well, thank you so much, Director, for asking me to give my closing remark. I am someone who is committed to long life learning, research, education, and continuous professional development. And many of the time, if I'm asked to sort of give some closing remark, I tend to remind colleagues and audience to join that ideology, in which case we commit ourselves to CPDs and continuous professional development. In the course of my research around auditor's gap, I also find that there's what we call the knowledge gap. So knowledge gap is, of course, what we know and what people think we know. So and the only way to bridge this gap is continuous professional development, continue to develop ourselves around, what is it that we do, i.e., taking courses around governance, risk and compliance, developing oneself around auditing. And that is relevant to the internal audit department of the university. And to do so, I look forward to collaborating with the universities to sort of bring to you some of our useful CPDs that we run here in London, if it's something that is relevant to you. And to the university community as a whole, I would want to say that let's continue to collaborate to strengthen governance. Let's continue to collaborate to hold the management of the university to account as to how they are guiding the reputation of the university. And let's continue to partner with the Senate of the university to lead us in the right strategic direction. And until when I will have the opportunity to speak to you on a platform like this in future, I once again thank the Vice Chancellor for giving me this opportunity, as well as the host for bringing me to speak to you today. I thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I call on Mr. Lawa for his own closing remark, I have some questions coming in now. There's a question from Prince Wale Idowu. He said, how can internal audit add value to the organization? I will give that to Dr. Olanrewaju. How can internal audits add value to the organization? You can unmute yourself, sir.
When we talk about value adding, I think we tend to see value adding. Some people tend to look at value adding or value creation from profitability alone, and something that it is only when the figures or the bank balance of the school or the university increases is the point where we add value. But I argue that that is not the point where value is being added. The point where value is being added is the point where the interest of the stakeholder aligns. That is where value is being added. And when we mean aligning the interest of stakeholders, who are these stakeholders in the university? The stakeholders are the staff, the stakeholders are the Senate, the stakeholders are the students, the stakeholders are the public, the stakeholders are the lecturer, non-teaching staff, teaching staff. And I'm very close to the university community through someone I don't want to mention. And the person mentioned that the current Vice Chancellor has done all his best to align the interest of the stakeholder. And the person asked me and said, do you not see that there is no strike throughout his tenure? The only reason why you don't have strike in an higher institution is because all the stakeholders are, happy. Well, I don't want to say for certain, but you see, when you see strike action, that is when people are not happy and they express the reason why they are not happy. When everything is calm and there's no strike, it means that the interest of the stakeholder to a large extent is being aligned. And that is the point where value is being created. The aligning of the interest.
Thank you very much.
That is where value is.
Thank you.
So
thank you. I have more questions coming in.
Quickly,
there's another question. There's another question, sir.
Go on, please.
There's another question, sir. Is internal audit query basically on financial or monetary only or compliance? From Mrs. Awoli, our former bosser. She's asking if internal audit query is basically on financial only or compliance. Lawal, please, can you answer that question, Mr. Lawal? Unmute yourself, please. Is internal audit query basically on financial or compliance? Unmute yourself.
Okay. I've unmuted myself. When internal audit issue query, it is beyond financial. Of course, it is the financial aspect that usually cause issues. On internal control generally, at times we are carrying out a review of operations of department and units of the university. And those ones has nothing to do with financial. So query at times could be financial, but most time we write memo, and because you did not see audit query on it, you do not consider that as audit query. But it is the financial ones that most people see as audit query. When we write memo on control process, on governance, it is also query, but because the title there is not query, you do not always see it as query. It is beyond that. The work of internal audit is beyond financial. It includes operation, it includes control, it includes governance and the likes. So it is much more than that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Olanrewaju, there is a question here. What are the examples of specific risks that a university is exposed to?
There are a lot of them, and I like that question because it's such an important question for the internal audit department of the university to do what we call risk identification. And once you identify the risk the university is exposed to, you then keep what we call a risk register and then design how to mitigate those risks. But let me give you one example, or the overarching risk, which I mentioned in my slide, is what I call reputation risk. For example, how do you talk about a university whose issuance of certificate is compromised? A university whose process in which the issuance of a certificate is compromised. Will you call that a university? Such university will lose credibility in the eyes of potential employer, in the eyes of further education or higher education institution who want to place relevance or reliance on their certificate. How do you rate a university whose lecturers are known for sex for mark? I mean, thank God that we haven't had that scandal so far in the Lagos State University, but you know how the universities who have had such scandal quickly come out to immediately denounce such act. How do you talk about university who is facing social risk? University who is not paying its staff, who is not treating its staff, whose welfare is poor. How do you rate universities whose terrorism and whose welfare and safeguarding arrangement is very poor as far as students is concerned? So these are some of the risks that universities are exposed to. So
thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We in LASU, we have a risk register, and that reputation risk is one of the things we look at in our risk register. Thank you very much for that. I have another question from the director of audits, University of, that is UI, University of Ibadan, Faniron. He said, he's asking, is there any way internal audit can minimize query without distorting the standard? Mr. Lawan, can you answer that? Is there any way internal audit can minimize risk without distorting the standard? Unmute yourself, please.
Okay. There are ways to minimize risk. You minimize
to minimize query.
Okay,
sorry.
to minimize
queries. Audit query.
Of course, we'll be doing that. One of the ways to minimize audit query is what we are having today. A lot of people, the infractions they commit is because they are unaware of the implications of such infractions. So when they are aware of the implications, they do things according to the law. So when we continue to sensitize the public, I remember the time our former director, who is now the bursar, he ensured that every member of the university has a copy of the financial regulations. So if we all go through these financial regulations, it will go a long way to minimize audit queries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawal. Director, Internal Audit, UI. The financial regulation to all staff, we educate them on how to adhere to lay down rules and regulation, and then it will minimize audit query. Thank you very much. There's another question here is there any rule or pattern as to documentation of audit query? Mr. Lawal, is there any rule or pattern as to documentation of audit query?
Yes, there's a standard by the university regarding documentation of audit query. And we try as much as possible to ensure this. At times when the issue is not really material, we could put a call through. But in most cases, we are expected to document it. And you will see there's another section for your response. So when we document it and you respond, most times, let me say 70% of the times, the response are satisfactory. And we allow the process to go. So there are rules, there are patterns.
Okay, thank you. There is another, I just want to add this to the answer you have given, that on payment vouchers, we ensure that we stamp any payment voucher that is queried. We stamp it with audit stamp, showing that this payment voucher is queried, so that the query will not be removed from that payment voucher. This is part of documentation. It will show that this payment voucher was queried and the answer will also be there. Anyone that picked that payment voucher will see the query. We will stamp it query so that you will not remove the query on the payment voucher. This is part of documentation for audit query. Another question I have here now is, why is it that papers are still queried when it is obvious one has complied? I don't agree with this.
We didn't hear you clearly, man.
I don't agree with this question. There is no way you
her audio just got disconnected, and I think she was just trying to make a point.
Hello, sir.
Okay, you are back.
Hello, sir. Are you hearing me now, sir?
No, we lost your voice or minutes.
Oh, sorry. I was just trying to. There was a question on why is it that papers are still queried when it is obvious one has complied. And I said, this question, I will answer it. There is no way you can comply with the rules and regulation of the financial regulation of the university that we will query your paper. And if at all we query your paper, if you answer the query satisfactorily, we will pass it. There is no reason why we should query your paper when you comply with rules and regulation. So that is, I've answered that question. Another question is, what are the example? No. What is the difference between professional expectation and regulatory expectation? Dr. Sharafa, you give us,
Okay.
you answer that for us, sir.
Okay.
The difference between professional expectation, maybe the person wants to say performance expectation and regulatory expectation.
So when the auditor deviates from what it is expected of him or her from the auditing standards or the relevant regulation, then we say there is a gap between what the editor has done and the law or the regulations. But when on the other hand, when the auditors does something different from what the public expect of him or her, then we say there's performance expectation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the chat board, there's no any other question on the chat board for now. Okay, there's a question from the Director Audits, University of Lagos, Mr. Odufote. He says, is there a need for audit query register? Mr. Lawal, please, can you tell us this? Can you explain this to us? The questions from the Director Audits, University of Lagos. Is there a need for audit query register?
Yes, for documentation purpose, there is need for audit query register. And when it is cleared, there's also a section in the query register that it is cleared. Maybe it is cleared based on compliance or satisfactory answer. It should be there. And this is for documentation purpose. In Lagos State University, Directorate of Internal Audit, we do have a query register for every query we issue out, maybe be it financial or otherwise.
So thank you very much. Our time is almost up now, so we are trying to wrap up. If there's any question, you can send it to our email. You can send it to my email, margaret.ogunkoya@gmail.com. I will put it on the chat board there. So, because our time is already up, I want to thank every participant. I want to thank the university management for giving us the opportunity to host this lecture. And then now I know that everyone, especially the university community, we now know the responsibilities and the roles of the internal audits. Also, you are now more knowledgeable on audit queries. That is, by giving the examples, Mr. Lawal gave us examples of situation where your papers will be queried. I now believe that we will not have much queries again to write in the Directorate of Internal Audit with this. Thank you very much.